Innovative educators with Brooke Folgers. Find community, find strategies, find hope. Welcome back to the Innovative Educators Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about something that has revolutionized how I educate, and that is feedback, specifically receiving feedback. I know this comes with a lot of feelings, so before you click pause or close out your podcast app, don't do that. And by the end of this, I hope to lay out clearly for you how feedback will make your educating and teaching more effective, more efficient, and more impactful. So let's get into it. So, on the previous podcast, I talked about how innovation is creating something new based on what we know. If we're going to create something new, we need to have some information to work off of that's kind of our baseline. I talk to a lot of educators, in my case, public school teachers, who express the feeling of, I don't know what my learners need. They want to do something impactful with their teaching. Maybe they even know that something needs to change with their teaching, but they're not quite sure what that is. And that is it's a place of tension, knowing something needs to change for our learners, but not knowing what that change is. Often in education, it can feel like a big blank canvas where maybe we do have some colors we're given, some tools we're given, but ultimately it's up to us to decide what we're putting on that canvas. And for a lot of us, it's hard to know where to start. We don't have time to try out 12 different things and figure out the one that works perfectly for our learners. We have limited time to plan, limited time to implement. And so we need to figure out what to do so we can do it quickly and get things moving. A lot of us in education have feelings about feedback for a variety of reasons that are definitely valid. And when I say feelings, I mean negative feelings. If you are a classroom teacher, you are well versed with the annual evaluations that happen where administrators will come in and watch you teach. Sometimes these administrators only watch you teach when it's evaluation time. They'll come in, they'll watch you teach one lesson, evaluate you on it. And these evaluations, depending on your situation, could be meaningless or very meaningful. When I talk to teachers about these evaluations, one thing that really stands out to me is the feeling that people do want feedback that is actionable. They want to know what is noticed, what could be improved, and they want to improve upon that. But often, because of our system and how pressed we all are for time, these evaluations are not providing enough content for us to work with in order to make some positive change to our practices. And if we're honest, often when we have an evaluation for an administrator to come observe, it's a lesson that we may have worked on more than our other lessons, or a lesson we already piloted once or twice and have refined to be really, really strong, something we don't always do with lessons. So, this feedback we're receiving from administrators is not accurate or not rich enough for us to do anything with. The other thing I've noticed about feedback in education is getting feedback on things that we don't really care about or don't really matter. I've had people come in, observe me teach, and comment on how wonderful my classroom setup is, or on the books in my classroom library, or on the way that I carry myself in front of kids. And while those are all positive pieces of feedback and make me feel good as a teacher, all it tells me is to keep doing what I'm doing. While those things do matter and while those things do impact students, I've seen many great teachers who do not have the most perfectly set up classroom or the most illustrious classroom library, or whose affect in front of kids is very different than my own. So, while I love that people love how my classroom is set up, I want feedback related to how students feel in my class and students' success with learning in my class. That's the feedback I care about that is often much harder to find or receive. The final thing that I've noticed about feedback in education and why it is often less than useful is many of us are well versed with a Likert scale. A Likert scale is that 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 scale, asking you to respond to statements ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. 9 times out of 10, people just go down the middle. Everything's a 3. So it's just neutral, essentially. What do I do with that? The middle of the road feedback, the neutral or no opinion doesn't help us at all. Also, I would argue that the 1 or 5 on a Likert scale, the strongly disagree or strongly agree, is also not helpful, especially if there is no comment section. How am I to know why you strongly agree or strongly disagree with a statement that I've put on a feedback survey? Think about it this way. If I'm giving a Likert scale survey at the end of a lesson and there's a student who they have their phone out during class, I take their phone, they're upset with me. We kind of have some tension the rest of the lesson. A ninth grader will likely then have that be reflected on a survey by strongly disagreeing or strongly agreeing with statements, not because they are an accurate representation of how the student feels normally, but because of the day and the situation that we encountered. I think that Likert scales are very emotion driven. And while emotions are important, I do not think that they give us the type of feedback that is actionable or give us big enough, clear enough trends that are actionable. So, the way we've been receiving and asking for feedback in education really does stifle our ability to innovate, to create something new, because it's not giving us anything meaningful to work with. So, the question is now, how do we get feedback that helps us make change, positive, impactful change with our teaching? We have to ask our learners for feedback and not with a Likert scale. Asking our learners for feedback lets us know immediately what they need. If the thought crossed your mind, I don't know if my learners can do that. Do you have data to support that statement? I think all ages of learners are able to give feedback. I was a high school English teacher, and so by the time my kids got to me, they'd had experience with teachers in the education system for 9+ years. These kids have seen a lot of teachers, a lot of negative things happen in classrooms, and some positive things. My students have far more experience in this district, in this school system than I do. By the time they got to me, they'd had some very positive experiences and some very negative experiences that let them know what they need as a learner. So we have to believe that our learners have background knowledge, have lived experiences, whether first grade or 12th grade, that they bring into the classroom and that they can use to give us feedback on our teaching. Why are we as educators often reluctant to ask our customers, our students, the ones whom we are planning and creating and designing and spending money on? Why are we so hesitant to ask them for feedback? I've noticed a few things about why educators are reluctant to ask learners for feedback. I'm going to share a few of these observations and why I think these are often excuses for asking for feedback. I'm really digging into it here, so bear with me. By the end of this, you will have a tool to ask for feedback and hopefully some misconceptions dispelled of why you shouldn't ask for feedback. One thing I've heard from educators when they're reluctant to ask learners for feedback is, what if my learners are super harsh? What if they're mean? First off, I would guess that majority of the time in your classroom, kids are not showing up like that. We all have moments where we don't show up with our best selves, but there are very, very few kids who their neutral state is to be mean. Now, we may have some kids who are a pain, some kids who are sassy, some kids who don't like us, but I really have an issue with viewing kids as mean. Adults can be mean, 100%. In public education, I think we often forget these are kids in front of us. They are just kids. It's a lot easier to remember that when it's a second grader, and we also need to remember that with 11th graders. These are kids who are still learning, figuring out who they are, and it's our job to provide them opportunities to learn and grow. So, if you're scared your learners will be mean or harsh, first thing to do, tell kids that. For many years now, we've been talking about building relationships with kids, getting to know kids. And I think a lot of times that's one sided of us asking kids to express their feelings without us expressing our feelings. So if that's what's been holding you back, maybe before you release the feedback survey, you say, hey, I really care to know what you think because I want to make this class the best it can be. And I'm a little scared that some people are just going to take this opportunity to write comments that are not helpful. So I'm going to ask that you please provide honest responses to help me make this classroom the best it can be and see what happens. Whenever I talk to kids that way, whatever age, there's always this look that comes across their face of like, oh, wow, my teacher's not just a robot that powers down in the corner of the classroom at the end of the day and powers back up at 7 a.m. They have feelings too. And by doing that, you are also telling your learners that you trust them to be able to give you actionable feedback. And that feeling of trust and belief will go so far with your learners. The other thing I've noticed that often is causes hesitation for teachers in asking for feedback is the feeling that, well, there's just going to be so much and it's going to say that everything is bad and that I need to change everything, and feeling that it'll be too much to take action on. Very valid feeling. My recommendation for that would be to make the feedback you ask for specific. In my time as a classroom teacher, there would be some days where I would ask for feedback on what is Miss Folgers doing well in her teaching, what could Miss Folgers improve, what's going well with our classroom community, what could be improved in our classroom community. Really big questions that can result in a lot of rich feedback, but also show me, wow, I really need to improve on some things. Other times I would ask for content specific feedback. How did the lesson go today? Was the reading today easy, medium, or hard? And what makes you say that? What helped you learn most in this unit? Starting with questions like that when asking for feedback will give you some very, very clear and specific things that went well and things that could improve. So I would encourage you, if you are feeling that you may get too much and too overwhelmed by the amount of feedback, start with 3 questions maximum. What was most useful for you with this lesson today? What was the least useful? And what did you learn today? Most useful and what did you learn today are very different. Most useful will get you responses about format, content. What you learned will show you the impact of your lesson on learners. And if that feels overwhelming, stick with the first 2. What was most useful for you in the lesson today and what was least useful? That's all you have to ask for. Those 2 questions can really apply to any field, to professional developments, to corporate settings, any time where you are delivering content to people for them to take action on, where they need to take away something from what you are putting in front of them. So I'm going to give you a few examples of feedback that students have given me. When I asked students what went well this week, here are some things that they said. The mini lessons. This was in a unit where I was looking at students writing every week and then teaching a mini lesson on the major errors I saw. And this student really liked that and they called it out. They said the mini lessons and they even put in parentheses times 10. Another thing a student said that went well is giving examples on how to find evidence. I want more of that. How powerful for us to be told from our learners, I want more of that. And then there's always a few where they say, nothing, nothing. If you would let me do nothing, that would be good. Those we read and we laugh because these are kids. In response to the question, what could be improved? Here are some things students said. When we walk into class, let us already be reading. Start the 15-minute timer immediately so we don't get off task and we have more work time. What the student was referring to is when kids would come into class, I had a 5 to 10 minute entry task, and then we were starting every single class period with independent reading every single day. And many kids were saying they want the bell to ring and reading to start immediately so that they have more time to read. What I hear the students saying is we want more time to read. What I can't do is have a group of 15 and 16-year-olds silently start reading when the bell rings. That is just not feasible for every kid. My takeaway from that was that I need to increase the reading time and maybe shorten my entry task so that kids feel they can jump right into reading. Another thing a student said is to help me be a more motivated writer. That's a big ask. That has a lot of facets and pieces, and I could easily get overwhelmed by that and spiral and think about all the things I have done to try to motivate this kid or students to be writers. But instead, I can read that and think to myself, what's one thing I could do in the next week to help kids feel the motivation to write? Give them a free response prompt, have them write a short story, anything just to help them feel motivation to write. It could be a 5-minute thing. But when I do that, I can also say, I got some feedback last week that we need some help to be more motivated with our writing. So here's what we're going to do today. And that kid will know that their feedback impacted me in our classroom and our learning. And that will buy trust and goodwill and a willingness to learn with that child that is hard to earn with some kids. But making visible that their feedback impacted our classroom is one way to do that. So feedback is not only beneficial for your teaching practice, for making the learning environment the best it can be, but is also a great way to build rapport and relationships with students, truly proving to them that they are a valued piece of the classroom community, that you are not just the sage on the stage, as some people say, but this is a collaborative space between teacher and student. So, while asking for feedback may bring up feelings that the feedback we receive will be harsh or the feedback will be too much that we don't know where to start, I hope that through my explanation and experience with feedback, that you feel you can start to ask for feedback in the coming week from your learners. You can start small with those 2 questions that I offered. And if you really want to jump in, I'm linking in the show notes my go to feedback questionnaire. As a classroom teacher, I gave these questions to my learners every single Friday. So that is linked below. You can just copy paste those questions into a document, into a Google form, whatever is most useful for you to collect feedback. So how can you gather meaningful feedback in the next week? For those of you who are really ready to innovate, what are you scared to get feedback on? Ask your learners for feedback on that. And let me know how it goes. Comment below what you learned or took away from the feedback you received from your learners, and I'll see you next week. If you have some ideas after today's episode, make sure to follow the show so you don't miss what's next. Leaving a quick review really helps us reach more innovative educators. Join us next Tuesday.